The wind swept across the open plains like a whisper from the past, carrying with it the faint smell of rain and the lonely creak of an old barn door. The sun had already dipped halfway behind the rust-red mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and sorrow. Down the slope, near a broken fence and a half-finished corral, a young woman knelt beside a wooden bucket, her hands raw from washing clothes that weren't even hers. Dirt clung to her dress. Her hair was a tangled mess of brown curls stuck to her cheek, and her face, though soft and gentle, was marked with exhaustion, not grace. Her name was Clara May, and in her quiet world, beauty had never been a gift. It had always been a weight she didn't carry. She wasn't raised to be pretty, she was raised to survive. Every dawn she rose before the rooster's call, tended the goats, fetched water from the creek, and fixed whatever the storm tore apart. And yet, for all her labor, the mirror inside the old farmhouse only showed her the same plain face, one she could neither love nor hate, only tolerate. That evening she whispered those cursed words again, the same ones she'd told herself 1,000 times before, words that the wind seemed to carry into the darkening sky. I'm not pretty. From behind her came the slow, steady sound of hooves crunching gravel. The horse snorted, a heavy breath cutting through the silence. Clara froze, not out of fear, but habit. Men on horses never brought her good news. She turned slowly, wiping her hands on her apron, and saw him. A tall cowboy sat in the saddle, hat tilted low, dust covering his coat and boots. His eyes, though shadowed by the brim, carried a kind of quiet strength, the kind that came from losing too much and still standing tall. His name was Eli Carter, a man known across the valley for fixing fences, breaking horses, and saying very little. But when he did speak, his words tended to linger long after he was gone. He dismounted with the ease of a man born to the saddle, his boots thudding against the dry earth. You shouldn't be out here this late, he said, voice low and rough like gravel rolling in water. Clara looked away. Somebody's got to finish the work, she muttered. He didn't reply at first, just watched her as she struggled with the heavy bucket, her hands trembling from fatigue. Then, without asking, he stepped forward and lifted the bucket himself. The simple gesture startled her. She wasn't used to kindness without reason. She stood still, heart beating faster, as he set the bucket beside the fence and glanced at her again. Why do you talk to yourself like that? He asked. Like what? Like you ain't worth the air you breathe. She swallowed hard, her throat dry. Because it's true, she said softly, eyes fixed on the dirt. I'm not pretty. Never was. Never will be. Eli's jaw tightened, but his gaze softened. He took a slow step closer, his voice dropping to a whisper that seemed to calm the restless wind itself. That's fine, he said. I ain't looking for pretty. I need honest, not fancy. The words hit her harder than any truth she'd ever known. They weren't sweet or polished, they were raw, simple, and real. And for the first time in a long while, Clara didn't know what to say. She wanted to argue, to laugh, to cry all at once, but her voice betrayed her. Eli turned away, started toward his horse, and added quietly, You can keep breaking your back for folks who don't see you, or you can start living for yourself. The world don't owe you beauty, Clara, but it might just give you peace if you stop fighting it. As the twilight deepened, he mounted up again and tipped his hat. Storm's coming tomorrow. Stay inside. And then he was gone, his silhouette fading into the horizon like a shadow swallowed by the setting sun. Clara stood there long after, her mind replaying his words, her heart unsure whether to break or heal. Somewhere deep inside, something small shifted, like a locked door creaking open for the first time. She looked up at the darkening sky, the wind brushing her face, and whispered, Maybe honest is enough. The night carried her whisper across the valley, past the fences and fields where Eli Carter rode in silence. He didn't know why. He'd said what he said, only that something about her silence had reminded him of his own. And as lightning flickered over the faraway ridges, both souls, one broken, one searching, felt for a fleeting moment that maybe, just maybe, fate had begun to stir. Morning came softly, a pale gold light, spreading across the valley like a promise that the world could start over if it wanted to. The storm Eli warned about had never arrived, though the clouds still lingered above the horizon, heavy and restless like thoughts that refused to fade. Clara awoke early as always, but something in her heart felt different, a strange, quiet hum that wasn't quite fear and wasn't quite peace. She couldn't shake the memory of his words, the way his voice had sounded when he said, I need honest, not fancy. They had carved something into her soul she didn't know how to name. As she brushed her hair beside the cracked mirror, she caught her own reflection and paused. For the first time, she didn't look away. Her eyes were tired, yes, but they were hers. Her scars were hers. Her story, hers. And for a brief moment, she allowed herself to think that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't as invisible as she thought. Eli returned that afternoon. She saw him before she heard him. The glint of his horse's mane in the sun, the shape of his hat cutting through the distance. He didn't come often to this side of the ranch, and yet something told her he would. He rode slowly, like a man who had nowhere to rush and nothing to prove. Clara stood by the fence, pretending to fix the rope she had already tied tight, but her hands trembled slightly. When he stopped beside her, neither spoke for a moment. The silence between them wasn't empty, it was full of everything they didn't yet know how to say. Finally, Eli cleared his throat. "Fence'll hold fine," he said, voice low. She smiled faintly without turning. "Maybe I just like fixing things," she replied. "Maybe," he said, his tone almost a whisper. "But some things don't need fixing. Clara." She finally looked up at him then, her eyes searching his face, and saw something there she hadn't expected. Gentleness. Not pity, not desire, but the kind of calm that only came from someone who had broken to and learned to rebuild. He spent the rest of the afternoon helping her carry wood, patch the barn roof, and haul feed for the livestock. They barely spoke, but every shared glance said enough. When she laughed once, an accidental, shy laugh at something silly he said about the rooster that hated him, he froze like he'd heard music for the first time in years. She noticed. "What?" she asked. "Ain't heard you laugh before," he murmured. Didn't know it sounded like that. Her cheeks warmed as she turned away, pretending to focus on her work. But that night, long after he left, she found herself replaying his words again and again, her heart unsteady in a way that didn't hurt this time. Days turned into weeks. Eli began stopping by more often, sometimes to fix something, sometimes just to sit on the porch and drink coffee while she worked. He never made her feel watched or judged. His presence was steady, like the wind that brushed through the wheat fields. He told her little pieces of his past in fragments, how he'd once loved someone who cared more for gold than goodness, how he'd left town to escape his own bitterness, how he learned that silence could be kinder than words. In turn, Clara spoke of her childhood, the loss, the loneliness, the night she prayed for someone to see her, not because she was beautiful, but because she was there. One evening, as the sun melted into a pool of crimson light over the ridges, they sat together on the steps of her porch. A storm brewed far off, but its rumble was soft, almost protective. Eli held a tin cup of coffee and Clara sat beside him, fingers fidgeting with her apron. The silence between them was gentle. "You ever think," she began softly, "that maybe some folks are meant to be alone?" Eli looked at her for a long time before answering. "No," he said simply. "I think some folks are just waiting for someone who speaks the same quiet." The air thickened with meaning. Her eyes met his, and for once she didn't flinch from what she saw. Warmth. Respect, something fragile but real. It wasn't a confession, not yet. But it was something stronger. A truth that didn't need to be spoken aloud. When lightning finally cracked the horizon, Eli stood and reached out his hand. "Storm's real this time," he said with a faint smile. "Come on. We'll tie down the gate before the wind gets wild." She took his hand hesitantly, her fingers trembling as they met his. His grip was firm, grounding. Together they worked in the pouring rain, laughter mixing with thunder, mud splashing on their boots. At one point, when she slipped on the wet grass, he caught her instinctively, protectively. For a moment, time froze. Her breath hitched as his arm held her steady, their faces inches apart, rain dripping from the brim of his hat onto her cheeks. The look in his eyes wasn't lust. It was something deeper, something like recognition. She stepped back first. Cheeks flushed, but he didn't move, just watched her quietly as if trying to memorize the moment. Later, after the storm eased and the night settled in, he led his horse toward the gate. "You should rest," he said. She nodded, shivering slightly under her shawl. "Eli?" she called out as he mounted. He turned, waiting. Her voice was small but steady. "Thank you for seeing me." He tipped his hat, a soft smile curving his lips. "You make it easy to see, Clara." And then he rode off into the wet, glimmering darkness. Story had only just begun. Inside the small farmhouse, Clara stood by the window, Watching the last streaks of lightning fade over the hills, her heart felt full and fragile at once. She didn't know what was happening, didn't dare name it, but for the first time, she didn't feel unseen. She pressed a hand to her chest, whispering into the quiet, "Maybe this is what it feels like, to be enough." Outside, the rain tapped softly against the roof, and somewhere far away, Eli rode beneath the stars, thinking of her voice, her eyes, her courage. Two souls, both scarred and searching, had found a kind of peace not in perfection but in honesty, and though neither said it aloud, both knew deep down their story had only just begun. The days after the storm stretched into weeks of quiet golden mornings and silver blue nights. The valley bloomed again, wildflowers pushing through the mud as if the earth itself was trying to heal. Clara worked as always, but now her steps felt lighter, her heart steadier. Eli still came around, sometimes with a new saddle to fix, sometimes with nothing more than silence to share. They didn't need words. Their comfort was built on the unspoken rhythm between them, the kind you only find once in a lifetime. But love, no matter how pure, always comes with a test. One evening, as the sky turned the color of ash and honey, a wagon rolled into the valley, its wheels creaking under the weight of strangers. From it stepped a woman, tall, beautiful, wearing a red dress that didn't belong to the dust of the plains. Her name was Margaret Hale, and her arrival cracked the calm like thunder before rain. Clara watched from a distance, as Eli greeted, the woman with a familiarity that made her heart tighten. The way Margaret smiled at him when soft, knowing, was the way only someone from his past could. That night, Clara couldn't sleep. Every whisper of wind sounded like doubt. Every creak of the old farmhouse reminded her of her place. Small, plain, forgettable. She told herself not to care, but her chest ached anyway. By morning, she had convinced herself that what she felt for Eli was foolish, a dream she had no right to dream. Yet when she saw him at the fence, talking quietly with Margaret, her courage faltered. She turned away before he could see her tears. The days that followed were heavy with misunderstanding. Eli sensed her distance but didn't know why. Clara, proud and wounded, stayed quiet. She avoided his visits, threw herself into work, and tried to bury what her heart refused to forget. One night, as rain returned to the valley, Eli rode through the storm to find her. The wind howled like a living thing, lightning painting the sky in blue fire. He dismounted at her porch, soaked to the bone, and banged on the door. "Clara, you gonna let the rain do all the talking?" he shouted. When she opened the door, her face was pale but strong. "You should go," she said softly. "Your friend might be waiting." His brows furrowed. "Friend?" "The woman in the red dress," she whispered. "She looked like she belonged where you do." "I don't." Eli stared at her for a long moment before stepping inside, water dripping from his hat onto the floorboards. "You think I care about some dress?" he said, voice raw. "That woman was a ghost from a life I walked away from years ago. She wanted to see if the man she left behind still cared. Turns out he doesn't." Clara blinked back tears. "Then why didn't you tell me?" "Because you didn't ask," he replied softly. "You started looking at yourself like you used to, like you ain't enough. I thought we were past that." The words cut through her like the wind outside. She wanted to be angry, but his honesty left no room for pride. "Eli," she murmured, "I'm not used to people staying." He took a step closer. "Then learn it with me." Silence fell, the kind that hums before something sacred. He reached out, his calloused hand brushing her cheek, wiping away the rain and the tears together. "You said you ain't pretty," he whispered. "But when you're standing here, telling the truth even when it hurts, you're the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." Her breath trembled, and in that fragile moment, all the walls she had built began to fall. She looked into his eyes and finally saw what he had seen all along. Not perfection, but peace. The thunder rolled, and before she could speak, he pulled her gently into his arms. It wasn't the kind of embrace that asked for anything, and it was one that promised everything. Outside, the storm raged, but inside that little farmhouse, two hearts found shelter not from the rain, but from the loneliness they had carried all their lives. By morning, the sky cleared. The valley smelled of new beginnings. Clara stepped outside, her bare feet touching the damp earth, watching the mist rise over the hills. Eli was by the corral, fixing the gate, humming softly to himself. She walked toward him, her smile small but certain. "What are you thinking?" she asked. He looked up, sunlight catching in his eyes. Thinking maybe this place finally feels like home, he said. Not the land. Not the house, you. She laughed quietly, shaking her head. You talk too much for a quiet man. Only when it matters, he replied. Later that evening, they sat by the fire, no need for words between them. The valley outside glowed in the fading light, the air rich with the scent of rain and pine. For the first time, Clara felt something she never had before. Not beauty, not perfection, but belonging. She realized that love didn't always arrive with fireworks or grand gestures. Sometimes it came softly, in shared silences, in the sound of boots on wooden floors, in the steady beat of two honest hearts learning to rest together. And when the wind passed through the cabin that night, whispering across the fields, it carried with it the same words that had started everything, only now, they sounded different. I'm not pretty, she whispered again, a faint smile on her lips. Eli looked at her from across the fire and answered, That's fine. I need honest, not fancy. The flames flickered. The stars shone brighter, and for once, the world felt exactly right. YouTube outro. If Clara and Eli's journey touched your heart, hit that subscribe button and stay with us for more stories of truth, courage, and love that grows beyond beauty. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is be honest, with the world and with yourself. Subscribe now and ride with us into the next story.